Maximilian Krah drops the absolute Bitcoin bomb and goes hard against the ECB and Christine Lagarde. He talks about a massive shift in the AfD, where even the gold bugs are now bullish on Bitcoin. He criticizes the current monetary policy. He says we need to allow alternatives. We can't just stubbornly stick to our program. We need to be open to Bitcoin and new technologies, because the financial system is currently in crisis mode. Additionally, he would have never sold the Bitcoin from Germany that was sold here in Saxony. But hey, the whole interview is extremely explosive from him. It seems that a rethink is not only happening among companies, not only among billionaires, among high net worth individuals, but also here in German politics a rethink is taking place, and we are now seeing very positive Bitcoin reports from Maximilian Krah. And that's what you see again and again, that people are pessimistic at first, for example. Then slowly they start studying Bitcoin, learning about it, and suddenly they realize, maybe it's not so bad after all. Then you become relatively neutral about it. At some point you realize, hey, this is actually way cooler than gold. There are even more advantages here. And then there are a whole lot of Bitcoin gold bugs who are really switching over to Bitcoin in a big way. And you can still have gold. There's nothing wrong with having both. But there are a whole lot of famous examples, like also Larry Lepp, who just released a new Bitcoin book, was a huge gold bug before, and now suddenly he's a big Bitcoiner. And we're also seeing that Bitcoin is increasingly making its way into politics. The AfD had quite a decent election result, and now many Bitcoiners in Germany are hoping that the AfD will push the Bitcoin issue even further. Let's hear what Maximilian Krah has to say about Bitcoin and company in a highly explosive interview.
Another thing that politicians really have no clue about is that you included it in your election program, which I found really funny because you've been fighting against the whole Bitcoin thing for years. So it's probably that you just want to hop on the bandwagon because it's trendy right now, right? We have a libertarian wing, we have a really strong libertarian wing, but they've completely boycotted it for years.
Because he was all about gold. Our libertarian wing was all about gold. For years, and only in the last few years has it shifted to Bitcoin, which is why it's included now. So we have a relatively strong libertarian wing. The most famous proponent is Peter Boehringer. I was on stage with him yesterday. And they were always very, very focused on gold, and didn't really have Bitcoin on their radar. And for the past 2 years, I've been experiencing a Q&A session about Bitcoin at every major election event.
So he's clearly saying that there's a shift in thinking, and that makes sense. I mean, just look at people like Michael Saylor, who was initially negative about Bitcoin. Larry Fink, who wasn't a fan of Bitcoin. Donald Trump, who wasn't a fan of Bitcoin. Now, all of a sudden, they're all Bitcoin bulls buying Bitcoin like crazy. And that's just the change that a whole lot of people are seeing. I also did an interview with Peter Boehringer, the one he's talking about. I'm really curious to see how his story unfolds, whether he opens up even more to Bitcoin. I mean, he has been open to Bitcoin, but he's not exactly a total Bitcoin freak or anything like that, like, for example, Michael Saylor or someone like that. But that could definitely still happen. We've seen this happen before, where people, as I said, were initially negative about Bitcoin, then became neutral and suddenly opened up completely and embraced Bitcoin. I mean, you don't have to do it, but at least a certain level of neutrality and openness is something you should have. And that's definitely good to see. It would be great if more politicians did that, if more parties got on board. I mean, you shouldn't get your hopes up about the AfD or anything, thinking they're going to turn Germany into a Bitcoin paradise or something. They also don't have in their election program that they want to implement a Bitcoin reserve strategy. Or they also don't have anything in there about making Bitcoin legal tender or anything like that. It's just that they want to keep the regulation relatively loose, not tighten it further or anything. And in the best case, Bitcoin develops bottom up anyway, which means that there is no need for politics at all. But if you bring politics on board, things can often move much, much faster when you can push through certain regulations and so on more quickly. But as it currently stands, a lot of regulation is coming from the EU, with the MiCA regulation, and Germany can do relatively little about it, even if we now have the Ultra Bitcoin Party here. I mean, it's a different story in the Czech Republic. The central bank here really wants to invest heavily in Bitcoin, and things are looking really, really cool. So they want to introduce a test portfolio, but that might also be because the Czech Republic has its own currency, the koruna, while Germany has the euro, which might make them a bit more constrained in terms of doing currency experiments. What I also thought was awesome was that he mentioned there are now Q&A sessions about Bitcoin at all the meetings, and that's exactly where the Bitcoin community can really give themselves a pat on the back for putting pressure on people, asking questions, and pushing for real solutions, instead of just treating the symptoms. They want to tackle the root problem, the corrupt and broken monetary system, and fix that. And I think there's a lot of consensus between gold bugs and Bitcoin enthusiasts, where the gold bugs understand that it's not about gold or Bitcoin, but rather that we have a common issue to solve, and that's the corrupt monetary system. And whether Bitcoin helps or whether gold helps or both in combination, it doesn't matter in the end. The main thing is that the entire fiat money cartel is broken up and Bitcoin is definitely a solution. Some might see gold as the solution too, and everyone can decide for themselves what they think is the better option. But really, it's about uniting forces and not pitting gold against Bitcoin. It's about standing together for freedom, like auditing the Fed in the U.S., and ideally auditing the ECB in the EU, and then cleaning up this whole mess and replacing it with something solid. But keep listening, the really exciting parts are yet to come.
For the past 2 years, I've been seeing a Q&A session about Bitcoin at every major election event. So it's there. In that respect, I stick to it. Yes, we have to free Bitcoin. We should free Bitcoin from regulation and pressure. All of us. We need to witness the financial system going into crisis, and we should have the courage to allow alternatives and see what works best. That's why we should promote Bitcoin and blockchain technology in general, and not let the European Central Bank crush it out of fear of competition.
The really big problem that I see here is what she is talking about. Yeah, now the AfD can open up to Bitcoin and all that, but if the central bank says, no, we're not interested, and puts the brakes on it, then they definitely have more power than any party here in Germany or anything like that. And we've already heard Christine Lagarde's statements. She says, no, Bitcoin is not a legitimate means of payment. Bitcoin is not a legitimate store of value. Instead, we prefer to stick with the euro. Bitcoin is too volatile. It's for criminals. The usual boring arguments are brought out here, and Christine Lagarde was also asked about the Czech draft. She did too. No, she doesn't think it's that good. At least it's good that central bankers now have to express their opinions on Bitcoin, that they have to take a stand and say how things are looking. But on the EU level, we don't see any real trend toward loosening things up. Instead, we see more of a tendency for increased surveillance. A digital euro is being introduced, but that doesn't fit together either. You can't open up to Bitcoin on the one hand and introduce the digital euro on the other, at least in my opinion. You probably need to completely cut off the digital euro project, end it entirely, because only by doing that can you send a signal that you're committed to freedom. Otherwise, it's just a big clown show, and we really have to realize that maybe Germany or some party doesn't have that much influence. That's why we need to focus on bottom-up technology. I'm not entirely sure. I think the AfD's election manifesto states, I think it should also say that they are against CBDCs or something like that, so that they don't think it's a good idea either. But the question is whether a German party, or even if they were in government, could really change much and prevent CBDCs, because as far as I know, it looks like it's already planned and set to go. The digital euro is on its way, and yeah, Bitcoin is an alternative to that, but like I said, as long as we're still tied to the CBDC, the digital euro, it's tough to make that happen. And Maximilian Krah also correctly points out that the system continues to be in crisis. This is going to keep going for a while. So we're definitely going to see more crises, we're going to see higher inflation, and we're probably going to see even more crackdowns. Because if the system keeps escalating and inflating even more, they'll have to keep people in the euro with capital controls or whatever else. So these aren't exactly the great trends that are coming our way. We can see it in the current elections. In the federal election, people are fed up with freedom. They would rather have socialism here. They would rather have control, which I don't understand at all. So I don't understand why people here are focusing on redistribution instead of personal responsibility. But that's why I'm here in El Salvador and not in Germany, because at some point I simply pulled the ripcord for myself and simply saw, okay, the trends that we're currently seeing here in Germany aren't necessarily good. I don't really feel like I belong there. Germany is still a great country. It's still a beautiful country. And if you're fighting for Germany, that's absolutely legitimate and commendable and totally beneficial. But I definitely feel more comfortable in countries where you can say, okay, hey, Bitcoin is accepted here, Bitcoin is embraced here, and maybe they uphold more freedom-oriented values or something like that. It's always getting harder to find something like that, to be honest. When you try to leave Germany, finding a better country isn't that easy, and with family and all, it just gets even tougher. So it's not that easy here. But listen up, there's more to say here because now the juicy points are coming.
Would you have sold the Bitcoin in Saxony? So at an absolute bargain price? No. That was just ideological blindness. If they had just waited a bit to see how everything developed in the US, they could have easily made double the profit.
In Saxony, we also have a bit of a problem that the quality of decision makers has declined since the ERN. So when it comes to the Bitcoin thing, we're seeing that. Another topic is, I see it at the airport in Dresden. This huge building that was built years ago, and it's seeing fewer and fewer flights. I don't know what the management is doing. And the third thing was, we had Thielmann as the general music director at the Dresden Opera, probably the best German classical conductor. And then they didn't renew the contract, because he somehow, I don't know, I still haven't understood the reason for that. It was probably like that. The left-wing ministerial bureaucracy wanted to get rid of him because it is so conservative and the CDU minister has no idea about music. And then you let Bitcoin infrastructure and an airport rot away in every economic sense. And even in the areas where we should be attracting tourists and where we're known for our classical music, we let our best assets slip away. So we generally have this issue across the German states, but unfortunately, I'm experiencing it in Saxony as well, because we started from a very high level. With Kurt Biedenkopf, we've seen a regrettable decline in the intellectual level of political and economic decision makers.
This is the crucial point here, because Bitcoin is an intelligence test and also an ego test. Bitcoin is a filter here, and here's the question of whether the people can pass this filter or not. I mean, of course, that's a very snobbish way to put it or something like that. Bitcoin is the filter here, Bitcoin is the ego test, Bitcoin is the intelligence test. But we simply see that the nations, the countries, the regions, the companies, the individuals who are now investing in Bitcoins will benefit massively in the near future, in the next few years. They will generate massive wealth, and they will also set an example towards freedom. And the countries that sleep on this, that say, okay, hey, we'd rather stick with old technology, we don't want anything to do with Bitcoin, it all seems too modern with computers and stuff, they're going to miss out. People are going to become massively impoverished here, not just financially, but also economically and intellectually. That is also what Max Krah is talking about, that there is also an intellectual crisis here. In the end, we just have some brainwashed MMT economists telling you that we can print money, somehow generate wealth in the school system. Don't train yourselves to be sovereign individuals who have their own finances under control, who can look after themselves. Independently, who can perhaps somehow generate an income here, independent of the company, independent of being dependent on some system, or something like that. That means you're really being trained to be a servant, not a sovereign individual. Then there are all the absurd MMT theories, and this is the great plague or the great disease or the great challenge that so many people are facing. This is where Bitcoin can really be the jumping off point, because Bitcoin is the glasses that let you see clearly again. Bitcoin is the lens that lets you see through the fiat illusion, where you then really understand, hey, the whole monetary system is manipulated, the school system is manipulated, we are being talked into something like 2% inflation. Deflation is really bad, all sorts of phrases and so on that we just keep accepting and questioning them is very difficult for many people. But Bitcoin can be a jumping off point here, and that's why the crucial thing is to just look at which companies, which people, which countries are opening up to Bitcoin. And if anyone here opens up to Bitcoin, then you should make sure that you allocate your energy, your consciousness, your resources there, because something good will blossom there. It's like if you simply have a bottom where those who focus on fiat money and on MMT or something like that, nothing will grow, everything will break, politicians, people, all the people who focus their energy on it, they will all fail, or it will be very, very difficult to build prosperity here. And just focus on the ground, on Bitcoin. Think of it like this. If you have Bitcoin as your foundation, it's like having great soil where good fruits can grow, where a strong economy can thrive, and where a decent society can develop. So just pay attention to who is opening up to Bitcoin, focus on that, and see who is not open to Bitcoin, who might be trying to cancel it. Maybe then redirect your energy or something like that. So that's definitely one way I go about it. I can usually gauge pretty quickly whether it makes sense to work with someone or not, just by looking at whether they get it, whether they see through the fiat illusion, whether they understand it with Bitcoin and so on. I mean, you don't have to take it all so seriously, you know? There are definitely some people who don't get it and are still cool, so it's not like that. Now that doesn't mean that it's the absolute. The criterion is that a lot of people are in a process, but that's the exciting takeaway from this interview. Super interesting stuff. Folks, let me know in the comments what you think about it. And very importantly, if you want to buy Bitcoin, I'll drop a link below on how you can easily and safely purchase Bitcoin. Use the code BitcoinHotel to get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin, and then you'll be all set to go. See you later. Peace out.